Anna Davis walked steadily down the sunlit sidewalk, the soft clack of her low heels echoing gently against the brick pavement. Around her neck hung a string of pearls, delicate, understated, yet impossible to ignore. It was her anniversary gift to herself, a symbol of love and resilience, carefully chosen and worn every year with quiet pride. In her hands, she carried a carefully wrapped package, a rare, first edition book she had spent months searching for, destined for her husband's birthday. The morning air was crisp, filled with the scent of blooming magnolias and fresh coffee from nearby cafes. To Anna, it was just another peaceful walk through her beloved neighborhood, a city she had called home for decades, with all its old corners and imperfect charm. She nodded politely at a flower vendor, smiled at an elderly woman feeding birds, and moved with the steady grace of someone who knew exactly where she was going and needed no one's approval. But across the street, in a weathered patrol car parked under the shade of oak trees, Officer Mark Reynolds sat nursing his lukewarm coffee, his eyes flickering with boredom after a long, tiring shift. Then he saw her, Anna Davis, a black woman, elegant and calm, walking alone with that gleaming pearl necklace catching the sunlight like a flare in an instant. A dark cloud of suspicion filled Mark's mind. No theft report, no suspects described, just a vague, unspoken narrative built on Anna's skin color and her air of quiet dignity. His hand drifted instinctively toward his holster, the weight of his authority twisting into something far more dangerous. To him, those pearls weren't just jewelry. They were a challenge, an affront to the stereotype he had unconsciously embraced. Without warning, Mark stepped out of the car, the harsh click of his boots against the pavement cutting through the morning's calm. His gaze fixed on Anna with a cold intensity, and before she could react, the gun was drawn, aimed squarely at her. The street seemed to freeze. Cafe patrons paused mid-sip, tourists lowered their cameras, and a hush fell over the crowd that had gathered unknowingly at the edge of something far bigger than a routine stop. That Anna's heart pounded, but she did not flinch. She met his gaze with unwavering calm, a quiet fire burning in her eyes. This was not the first time she had been seen as a threat for simply existing. Yet today, in these frozen moments, her dignity would become her shield, and her courage, a beacon that would soon ignite a city. The fateful encounter was only beginning. Anna Davis stood motionless as Officer Mark Reynolds' gun was fixed on her, the cold steel reflecting the morning sun with a chilling clarity. The street around them seemed to hold its breath. Time stretched thin like a fragile thread, threatening to snap under the weight of that loaded silence. But Anna, years of life's battles etched softly in her eyes, refused to be crushed by fear or anger. Her breathing remained steady, deep, controlled, a silent act of defiance against the storm gathering before her. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She simply reached into the inside pocket of her jacket with measured grace, her fingers brushing the edge of her phone. It was not a weapon, but her shield, a tool that could turn the tide, a witness to truth in a moment when truth was under siege. The click of her unlocking the phone, quiet yet deliberate, was a whisper that rippled through the growing crowd. Passers-by stopped. Some held their coffee cups frozen mid-air. Others hesitated with grocery bags grasped tightly. Then, one by one, phones lifted, lenses turned. The glow of screens blossomed like fireflies in the dawn light. The quiet act of recording became a collective heartbeat, each frame a brick in an invisible wall of accountability. Anna's voice remained calm as she spoke softly, just loud enough to be caught clearly on the recording. "Please, officer, explain the reason for this." Her eyes never left Mark's, steady and unflinching, piercing through the haze of his prejudice. The crowd leaned in, sensing the gravity of the moment. Not just a confrontation, but a fracture in the fabric of justice itself. Mark's lips twitched into a forced smirk, a grimace born more of irritation than confidence. "We've had a report of jewelry theft," he barked. "Matching description." His hand tightened slightly on the gun, misreading Anna's subtle movement as a threat rather than the gentle adjustment of her purse strap. The bystanders' phones captured every second, the rising tension, the flickers of fear and courage intertwined in Anna's expression, the small shifts in Mark's stance as the reality of witnesses mounted. Each frame added pressure on the officer, transforming what could have been a private abuse of power into a public reckoning. Around them, whispers rose like a slow tide. "She's done nothing wrong. Why point a gun? Is this justice?" The murmurs swelled, the invisible crowd growing heavier with every breath. The air thickened, charged with unspoken demands for accountability, the kind that no badge could shield. Anna's voice cut through the haze again, calm yet sharp. "You have no grounds. I am a taxpayer, a citizen. Your suspicion is based on nothing but skin color and assumptions." Her words were both a plea and a challenge, a reminder that dignity is not a privilege, but a right. Mark glanced around nervously, eyes flicking to the sea of glowing screens pointed straight at him. The weight of scrutiny began to bend his resolve. For the first time, his hand wavered near the gun. The training drilled into him, control, de-escalation, clashed violently with the simmering ego demanding dominance. But the crowd was no longer silent. Phones continued to roll, capturing his every move, every strained breath. A teenage girl's voice rose clearly from the crowd. "Keep recording. Don't let him get away with this." Others nodded, some raising their voices in quiet support, creating a chorus that made the tension almost unbearable. Anna felt the pulse of the city around her, the collective will of those who refused to look away. The simple act of standing still, of holding her ground, had transformed into a powerful statement. Her phone's recording was more than just evidence. It was a beacon calling for justice in a moment when justice seemed absent. Mark's gaze faltered. The gun, once steady and threatening, now seemed heavy, a symbol of authority trembling under the weight of truth. Yet his voice tried to cut through the rising storm. "ID now. Procedure." His tone was sharp, but the confidence was cracked that Anna's eyes narrowed just slightly, the faintest trace of steel threading through her calm. "Procedure or prejudice? I'm asking for the legal basis. You have none." Her words rang out, clear and unyielding. The phones captured every syllable, every flicker of emotion that passed between them. Around them, the crowd edged closer, the invisible wall solidifying. Tourists lowered cameras, shop owners paused mid-clean, and neighbors gathered, all bearing witness. The story was no longer just Anna's. It belonged to every person who had ever been wrongly suspected, silenced, or threatened. Mark's hand twitched, the gun's muzzle trembling slightly as if unsure whether to obey the silent command of conscience or the louder roar of fear and bias. A collective gasp rose when, unexpectedly, a soft but firm whistle echoed from the crowd. A sharp reminder that the world was watching. Anna's voice softened, yet each word was a blade cutting through denial. "Is this how you police your city? By aiming guns at those you fear, not those you serve?" Her gaze held Mark's, unwavering, a mirror reflecting the injustice of the moment. The officer's face flushed. Sweat beaded at his temple. The tension grew electric, the weight of so many eyes unbearable. The gun lowered just a fraction, but the threat still lingered, suspended in the air like a storm waiting to break. The crowd held their breath, the cameras still rolling. Anna's hand never left her phone, her voice steady, her heart resolute. In that fragile moment, strength was not loud or violent. It was calm. It was presence. It was refusal to be erased or silenced. The story unfolding on King Street was no longer just about a necklace or a gun. It was about the fragile line between fear and justice, between prejudice and truth. And through the lens of countless phones, Anna Davis was no longer alone. 5 seconds. Just 5 heartbeats of silence that stretched longer than any minute could bear. The tension on King Street had reached a crescendo, a fragile balance between calm and chaos. Officer Mark Reynolds stood frozen, gun still partially drawn, sweat slick on his brow, eyes darting nervously to the sea of faces and countless glowing screens recording every moment. Then, slicing through the heavy stillness, came the low rumble of an engine. Steady, purposeful, impossible to ignore. A sleek black SUV rounded the corner, tires screeching softly on the asphalt. A dark shadow gliding across the red brick road. The crowd instinctively parted, a silent corridor forming as the vehicle rolled to a smooth stop mere feet away from Anna and Mark. The driver's door swung open with a decisive click. The air shifted palpably, charged now not just with tension but with authority. David Davis, tall and commanding in his crisp police chief's uniform, stepped out. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, swept over the scene with the weight of years spent navigating power, pressure, and justice. The polished gold stars on his epaulets caught the sunlight, casting brief, brilliant flashes, like the beacon of truth himself. Mark's hand, which had trembled moments ago on his holstered gun, froze mid-motion. The proud badge on his chest suddenly felt heavier than ever, burdened not by duty, but by the crushing gaze of the man who wore the city's highest law enforcement mantle. His body shifted instinctively, from hunter to hunted, from aggressor to accused. David's voice cut through the murmuring crowd, low, resonant, commanding. "Officer Reynolds, step away from the citizen immediately." His words were not a request. They were a decree that carried the full weight of the law and the moral authority behind it. Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly as he hesitated. The gun, once raised as a symbol of threat, lowered slowly, the safety clicking back into place. The crowd exhaled collectively, a wave of relief mixing with a newfound hope. Anna stood firm, her gaze steady, shoulders squared but her heart pounding fiercely. She felt the shift ripple through the air, the invisible walls of intimidation crumbling under the weight of the chief's presence. David crossed the space between them, each step deliberate and measured, the crackle of tension replaced by the heavy thud of resolve. Without a word, David's eyes locked onto Mark's, piercing and unrelenting. "Explain your actions," he demanded, voice steady but edged with disappointment. Mark's mouth opened, then closed, a stammer trapped in his throat. "Sir, I had a report," description matched. His words faltered, his justification unraveling under the chief's intense scrutiny. David's gaze sharpened. There was no report filed, no suspect description, no case number. His voice hardened, every syllable striking like a hammer. "You drew your weapon without cause, threatened a citizen based on nothing but prejudice and assumption. This behavior is unacceptable and will be addressed with the utmost severity." A murmur swept through the crowd, voices rising in quiet affirmation, the power of truth echoing beyond the walls of King Street. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of Mark's shame and the steady authority of David Davis. David turned to Anna, his expression softening for a brief moment, a flicker of personal pain and pride mingling in his eyes. He reached out, gently brushing her shoulder, a silent reassurance in the midst of chaos. Then, facing the crowd, he raised his voice to carry clearly over the murmurs. This department serves the people. No badge grants immunity from accountability. No rank excuses abuse of power. We stand here today to reaffirm that justice must be blind to everything but the truth. Mark's shoulders sagged under the weight of public condemnation. The gun he once wielded as a weapon of fear was now a symbol of failure, discarded and humiliated. David's command was swift and clear. Officer Reynolds, surrender your weapon and badge to the Internal Affairs team upon arrival. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation. Mark complied, hands trembling as he removed the magazine, engaged the safety, and placed the gun carefully on the hood of the SUV. The metallic clang echoed like a death knell, a somber sound marking the fall of false authority. The crowd erupted, not in wild celebration, but in a steady, respectful applause, the sound of a city reclaiming its voice, its dignity, its hope. Tears glistened in some eyes. Others nodded quietly, united in the recognition that justice had momentarily prevailed. David's gaze swept the crowd again, firm and unwavering. Your videos, your voices are powerful. If you see wrongdoing, speak out. Demand accountability. This is only the beginning. His words lingered in the crisp morning air, a call to action that resonated far beyond King Street. Anna caught David's eye once more, their silent exchange conveying gratitude and strength. Together, they stood as symbols. One as the citizen wronged but unbowed, the other as the guardian sworn to protect truth and fairness. Behind them, the cameras continued to roll, live streams capturing the unfolding story that would soon ripple through the city, the state, the nation. The tension that had once threatened to shatter was transformed into a spark, a flicker of change lighting a path through the shadows. Mark was led away quietly, the crowd parting as the Internal Affairs team arrived, their presence signaling the weight of consequence. No words were spoken, but the heavy silence said everything. Power misused comes at a price, and no one stands above the law. David Davis turned back to Anna, his voice softer now but resolute. We will get through this. Together. Anna nodded, feeling the steady pulse of justice begin to beat stronger. Not just for herself, but for all who had suffered in silence. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, hope was real, sharp, and unyielding. The black SUV's engine hummed as it pulled away, leaving behind a street forever changed. A place where courage met authority, where truth faced fear, and where 5 seconds became a lifetime remembered. The black SUV had just disappeared around the corner, but the reverberations of that tense moment still echoed through the cobblestone streets and the hearts of the gathered crowd. The presence of Chief David Davis had not only defused a volatile situation but ignited a firestorm that would challenge the very foundations of the police department and the city it served. Inside the sleek, sterile precinct conference room, the atmosphere was thick with tension and urgency. David stood at the head of a long, polished table, surrounded by a cadre of senior officers and department leaders. His gaze was sharp, commanding the attention of every person in the room. There was no room for denial or delay here, only accountability. Effective immediately, David began, his voice steady but resolute. Officer Mark Reynolds is suspended pending a full internal investigation into his conduct. His words hit like a thunderclap, reverberating in the silent room. We cannot and will not tolerate prejudice, abuse of power, or any breach of trust under my command. Some officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The room was a battlefield of conflicting loyalties, between preserving the force's reputation and confronting its painful realities. David's piercing eyes swept across them, daring anyone to challenge the declaration. This investigation will be transparent, he continued. The public deserves nothing less. We owe our community accountability, honesty, and respect. Our badge is a symbol of service, not privilege. Meanwhile, across the city, Anna Davis stood on the steps of the local community center, a place once quiet but now buzzing with energy and resolve. Word had spread quickly. Her courage had become a rallying cry. She was no longer just a woman who wore pearls. She was the face of resistance, a beacon for those who had suffered in silence for too long. Community leaders, activists, and citizens gathered around her, their voices rising together in chants demanding justice and systemic reform. The air was electric, charged with a mixture of hope and urgency. Anna's steady, unwavering voice cut through the crowd like a clarion call. "We are here not just for me," she declared, "but for every person who has been stopped, judged, and threatened because of the color of their skin. We demand transparency. We demand protection of our civil rights. We will no longer accept fear as our daily companion." Her words resonated deeply, drawing nods, tears, and a swelling sense of solidarity. Mothers clutched their children's hands tighter. Young people lifted signs high above their heads. "Justice now, end racial profiling, dignity for all." Back at the precinct, the investigation proceeded with an intensity that shocked many. Internal affairs officers meticulously reviewed body cam footage, incident reports, and witness statements. Mark Reynolds found himself confronted by evidence that stripped away his justifications, revealing a pattern of bias and reckless behavior that had been ignored far too long. The city's media caught wind of the unfolding scandal. News outlets broadcast live from outside the police headquarters, capturing the charged atmosphere. Reporters interviewed residents, activists, and legal experts, each underscoring the urgent need for change. Inside the courtroom, the first hearing loomed. Anna prepared herself to testify, aware that her story had become a symbol far bigger than herself. She was ready to stand firm, to face not just Mark, but an entrenched system reluctant to change. The day of the hearing arrived with palpable tension. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Cameras lined the walls, and social media buzzed with hashtags like #JusticeForAnna and #AccountabilityNow trending nationwide. The judge called the session to order, her voice calm yet commanding. Mark Reynolds sat at the defendant's table, his usual bravado replaced by a hollow uncertainty. The prosecuting attorney wasted no time presenting damning evidence. Video footage of the incident, witness testimonies describing Mark's aggressive and unjustified actions, and internal department records revealing prior complaints against him for similar conduct that had been swept under the rug as the evidence unfolded. A hush settled over the courtroom. The weight of truth was undeniable. Anna took the stand, her voice clear, steady, and unflinching as she recounted the incident. The fear, the humiliation, and the courage it took to stand her ground. "I was walking home," she said, "with nothing but a gift for my husband and the dignity that belongs to every citizen. Instead, I was stopped, threatened, and disrespected because of my skin color and my jewelry. But I refused to be silenced or invisible." Her testimony struck a chord not just in the courtroom, but across the city. For many, it was the first time the cold reality of racial profiling was confronted so openly and visibly. For others, it was a painful confirmation of what they had feared but felt powerless to challenge. Outside, supporters gathered, their voices echoing the courtroom's gravity. Community leaders demanded sweeping reforms. Independent civilian oversight of the police, mandatory bias training, public access to officer disciplinary records, and protections for whistleblowers within the force. The hearing continued over several days, each session peeling back layers of a deeply flawed system. Former officers testified about the culture of silence and complicity that had allowed misconduct to fester. Legal experts outlined the urgent need for systemic changes to restore public trust. Amidst the turmoil, David Davis stood unwavering, championing reform from within while balancing the weight of leadership and personal commitment. He spoke candidly to the press. "We are facing a reckoning, one that demands honesty and courage. This is not just about one officer. It's about rebuilding trust with the community we serve." The climax came when the jury returned its verdict. Guilty on all counts of misconduct, abuse of power, and violation of civil rights. The courtroom erupted, but not in chaos, in solemn recognition that justice had been served. Though the path forward remained daunting, Anna and David exchanged a look, a blend of relief, determination, and the sober understanding that this victory was just the beginning. The city had been forced to confront its darkest corners, and now the hard work of healing and reform lay ahead. The story of that fateful morning on King Street had transformed from a moment of personal crisis into a movement for change, a testament to resilience, accountability, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. Anna Davis was no longer just a victim. She was a catalyst, inspiring a city and a nation to stand tall and demand better. And as the sun set over the skyline, casting long shadows across the streets, a new chapter began. One where voices once silenced now spoke with power, and where the truth, once suppressed, shone brighter than ever before. Anna Davis's story didn't end in the courtroom. It was only the beginning, the spark that ignited a wave of change sweeping through the city and beyond. What started as a painful, personal encounter transformed into a powerful movement for justice, equity, and respect. Her courage resonated deeply, inspiring countless individuals to stand up, speak out, and reclaim their dignity. In the months following the trial, the city witnessed a remarkable transformation. Community centers, churches, and schools buzzed with activity. Educational programs dedicated to civil rights, legal awareness, and nonviolent activism sprang up, led by dedicated volunteers, legal experts, and activists. These programs aimed not just to educate, but to empower every individual with knowledge about their rights and the tools to defend them. Anna herself became a frequent speaker at these gatherings, her presence both calming and electrifying. With quiet strength, she shared her story, reminding people that justice isn't a distant ideal. It's something everyone deserves every day. She encouraged young people to carry the torch, to never accept silence or fear as answers to injustice. One evening, at a packed community hall, Anna looked out over a sea of faces. Teenagers, parents, elders, activists, all united by a common purpose. She spoke slowly, carefully, each word a seed planted in fertile ground. "We don't need to be heroes," she said. "We need to be human, to stand tall in the face of injustice, to speak our truth, and to lift others as we rise. Change is not a thunderstorm. It's a steady rain that nourishes the roots of a better tomorrow." Her message rippled through the room like a gentle wave, spreading hope and determination. The crowd erupted in applause, not just for her words, but for the shared promise they represented. Meanwhile, the city government responded with new policies and reforms. The police department, under fresh leadership inspired by Chief David Davis's vision, implemented mandatory civil rights and implicit bias training. An independent civilian oversight board was established, including community representatives, human rights lawyers, and activists, to review complaints and ensure transparency. Whistleblowers within the force were granted protections to safely report misconduct without fear of retaliation. The streets themselves began to reflect this new era. Murals honoring Anna and others who stood against injustice appeared on walls, vibrant testaments to resilience and solidarity. Schools incorporated lessons on civil rights history alongside practical training on advocacy and civic engagement. The conversation about race, power, and justice, once hushed or ignored, became part of the city's everyday dialogue. Social media played a vital role in spreading the movement beyond Charleston. Hashtags like #StandWithAnna and #JusticeInAction trended nationally, connecting activists, educators, and everyday citizens hungry for change. Stories of similar incidents surfaced from other cities, fueling a broader call for reform that transcended local boundaries. Anna used her growing platform with humility and purpose. She spoke not for fame but for the millions whose voices had been muffled by fear or indifference. Through interviews, panel discussions, and community workshops, she reminded people of the power they hold, the power to demand accountability, to protect each other, and to build a future where dignity is not negotiable. In one particularly moving moment, Anna visited a local high school to speak with a group of students. She shared her experience and then invited them to ask questions, not just about her story, but about their own hopes and fears. A young girl raised her hand, voice trembling. "How do you stay strong when things seem so unfair?" Anna smiled softly, her eyes reflecting years of struggle and hope. "Strength comes from knowing you're not alone. When you stand up, others will stand with you. When we raise our voices together, injustice has nowhere to hide." That day, many students left the room with a newfound resolve, understanding that change isn't handed down from above. It is forged by the collective courage of ordinary people. The movement also inspired local artists, musicians, and writers. Songs of resilience and justice filled city parks. Art exhibits explored themes of identity and struggle. Writers penned essays and stories capturing the spirit of a city, refusing to turn away from its past mistakes. Anna's pearls, once a symbol unjustly targeted, became a quiet emblem of endurance and grace. She wore them with pride, reminding everyone that dignity is not given. It is claimed, defended, and celebrated as time passed. Anna continued her quiet activism, refusing to rest on the laurels of a single victory. She mentored young leaders, collaborated with nonprofits, and helped establish legal aid clinics to assist those facing discrimination and injustice. Her home became a sanctuary where stories were shared, strategies formed, and hope rekindled. Looking back, the incident on that spring morning seemed less like a tragic anomaly and more like a call to action that changed a community forever. Anna's resilience taught the city that the fight for justice requires patience, persistence, and unwavering faith in the power of truth. For those who followed her story, it became clear: real change starts when we refuse to stay silent, when we dare to stand tall, even when the world expects us to bow. And so, Anna's journey became a living lesson in courage, a beacon for anyone who has ever faced injustice and wondered if their voice could make a difference. It did, and it will. If this story moved you, if it sparked something inside you, remember, change is not the work of one person, but the collective heartbeat of many. Stand with courage, speak with truth, and never let your dignity be questioned. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories of resilience, justice, and hope. Together, we can shine a light on the darkness and build a world where everyone is seen, heard, and respected. Thank you for being part of this journey. The future is ours to shape, and it begins with standing tall today.